Did you know that over 50% of Americans say they want a third party, but less than 1% of US politicians are from third-party groups? Shocking, right? The system is set up in a way that makes it nearly impossible for anyone but the Democrats and Republicans to win. Third-party candidates face huge obstacles, laws, money, and even the media are all stacked against them. In this video, we're going to dive into why third parties will never win in America and, more importantly, how this whole setup is by design. We'll explore the hidden rules that keep third parties out of the game and the clever tricks the major parties use to stay in power. Stick around to learn about how the two-party system is rigged and what, if anything, can be done to break it. Ready for the truth? Let's jump in. Chapter 1: The Hidden Hand. How the system keeps third parties down. The two-party system in America might feel like a natural part of the landscape, but it's far from accidental. Behind the scenes, there are powerful structures in place that keep third parties from ever getting a real shot. One key factor is the winner-takes-all electoral system. In this system, only the candidate with the most votes wins, leaving no room for third-party candidates to thrive. This makes voters feel like choosing a third-party candidate is a wasted vote, even if they truly want an alternative. Another problem is gerrymandering, the practice of drawing electoral district boundaries to favor one party. This has made it extremely hard for third parties to gain a foothold. In 2020, for example, gerrymandering was responsible for rigging elections in favor of the two major parties, which made it nearly impossible for smaller groups to compete effectively. Let's not forget about the Electoral College. With its winner-takes-all system, only a few swing states matter in presidential elections. This leaves third-party candidates at a huge disadvantage, especially since they usually don't have the resources to win these key states. Think about it. In the 2016 election, Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, managed just 3.3% of the vote but wasn't able to win even a single state. Here's a fun fact: research shows that third-party candidates rarely even make it to the debates. The Commission on Presidential Debates, which controls the stage, requires candidates to have 15% support in national polls. This threshold automatically locks out any third-party candidates who are not already well-known or heavily funded. It's an obvious barrier to entry. In fact, the system itself practically makes third-party success impossible. The first-past-the-post method rewards the two largest parties and leaves the rest fighting for scraps. Why? Because each election reinforces the dominance of these two parties. This pattern keeps repeating itself, pushing third-party alternatives further out of reach. Now, think about this. In 1992, Ross Perot, an independent, was able to capture a huge chunk of the vote, 19%. Yet, he still had no chance of winning. Despite that high number, the system worked against him, and he didn't secure a single electoral vote. This really shows how deeply entrenched the two-party system is. The system is rigged from the start, which means third parties are often stuck on the sidelines. Chapter 2: Media Monopoly. The real gatekeepers of politics. Have you ever noticed how third-party candidates barely get any coverage in the media? It's not by accident. The media plays a huge role in shaping public perception, and they've been conditioned to focus on the two main parties. Research shows that, in the 2016 election, the media spent nearly 90% of its time covering the top two candidates, Clinton and Trump, leaving third-party candidates with little to no attention. Think about the last time you saw a third-party candidate on your newsfeed. Probably never, right? It's not just you. Media outlets often ignore third parties or portray them as fringe groups. The media's tendency to focus on a horse race narrative that only includes the top two candidates makes it seem like there are no real alternatives. As a result, third-party candidates are rarely given a fair shot to present their ideas to the public. A good example of this is Bernie Sanders. Before he became a Democrat, Sanders ran as an independent. Despite having strong support, he was often ignored by mainstream outlets until he started gaining more momentum. His message resonated with millions, but he still faced tremendous media bias, especially during his 2016 campaign. This bias made it harder for his supporters to get the attention they deserved. The media also controls the narrative. In 2016, when third-party candidates like Johnson and Stein appeared in the polls, many outlets minimized their significance, focusing only on the traditional Democratic versus Republican battle. This further pushes the message that third parties can't win, even if the numbers suggest otherwise. Another tactic is the use of loaded language. For instance, third-party candidates are often referred to as spoilers, rather than legitimate candidates. This reinforces the idea that voting for anyone other than the top two is a waste of time. In reality, third-party votes can be more of a statement about dissatisfaction with the system than a choice for a specific candidate. Interestingly, the media also benefits from the two-party system. The major networks and outlets make a lot of money off election cycles by focusing on the drama of the major parties. By keeping third parties on the periphery, they maintain a stable, profitable model for political coverage. Chapter 3, Money Talks, the financial blockade against alternatives. Let's face it, politics isn't just about ideas, it's about money. And in the world of American politics, money is heavily skewed toward the two main parties. In 2020, the Democratic and Republican parties spent over $14 billion combined on elections. In comparison, the Libertarian and Green parties combined spent just $15 million, a drop in the bucket. Why the gap? For starters, the two major parties have massive fundraising machines behind them. They have access to super PACs, wealthy donors, and corporate interests that flood their campaigns with money. This means they can outspend third-party candidates by a huge margin. This imbalance makes it extremely difficult for third parties to compete, no matter how good their ideas are. For instance, in the 2016 presidential race, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump both had hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, while Gary Johnson's Libertarian campaign only raised about $12 million. That's a staggering difference. Third-party candidates simply can't compete with the resources available to the two main parties. On top of that, third-party candidates don't have access to the same fundraising channels as the Democrats and Republicans. For example, the Federal Election Commission, FEC, matches public funding to candidates who meet specific requirements. However, to qualify for matching funds, a candidate needs to secure 5% of the national vote. In practice, this threshold makes it almost impossible for third parties to get the financial support they need to compete with the big two. Big corporations also play a huge role in funding elections. Companies tend to support the party that most aligns with their interests, and because Democrats and Republicans are so entrenched, they have a lot of financial backing from powerful lobbyists and PACs. This leaves little room for third parties to attract substantial corporate funding, further widening the gap. The Citizens United ruling, which allowed unlimited spending by corporations in elections, further tilted the playing field toward the two main parties. With all the money pouring into these campaigns, third parties are often left scrambling for small donations or relying on grassroots funding that pales in comparison. It's clear that money plays a major role in keeping third parties sidelined. Until we address the massive financial disparities in politics, third parties will continue to struggle to make a dent in a system that's built to serve the status quo. If you find this content interesting, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into how the system works against third-party candidates. Chapter 4, Divide and Conquer, the tactics of the two-party duopoly. One of the most effective strategies the two major parties use is polarization. This is the process of pushing voters to pick sides, usually by highlighting how different the two parties are from each other. The goal? To create a sense of urgency, where voting for anything other than the main two feels like a betrayal. This, us versus them, mentality works because it makes people feel like the stakes are incredibly high, and they have to choose the lesser evil to avoid a worst-case scenario. Think about the 2016 election. For many voters, it wasn't about picking a candidate they truly supported, it was about preventing the other party from winning. Research shows that nearly 40% of voters in 2016 said they were voting against a candidate, not for one. This strategy works to perfection, forcing people to hold their noses and choose between two bad options. It makes third-party voting feel pointless, as voters see no benefit in choosing a candidate with no chance of winning. But this is more than just a tactic. It's a deliberate strategy by the two parties to lock down power. They know that if voters are constantly fearful of the alternative, they'll stick with the familiar, even if they dislike it. This division creates a false sense of choice, but in reality, the two parties are far more similar than most people think. For example, both parties often align on key issues like defense spending, corporate tax breaks, and healthcare reform, yet they fiercely oppose each other on less critical issues, keeping voters divided. This divide and conquer strategy is also played out in negative campaigning. Instead of offering new solutions or focusing on their own merits, the major parties tend to attack third-party candidates, calling them spoilers or wasting votes. In the 2000 election, Ralph Nader was often blamed for stealing votes from Al Gore, even though many of Nader's supporters would never have voted for Gore in the first place. This type of rhetoric keeps third-party candidates from gaining traction, making it seem like voting for them is just a way to help the enemy. Interestingly, polarization also taps into the psychology of fear. Fear-based messaging has been proven to increase voter engagement. Fear of a bad outcome is often more powerful than the hope of a good one. When the two major parties use fear to drive voters to the polls, third parties are left on the outside, unable to compete in this high-stakes environment. Polarization also encourages a rigid two-party mindset among voters. Studies show that once people become strongly attached to one party, they often feel it's a betrayal to consider another option. This emotional investment keeps voters locked into the same party cycles, creating an environment where third-party options feel irrelevant or even dangerous. Subscribe now to stay informed about how the two-party system shapes our politics and what can be done about it. Chapter 5: The Illusion of Choice. Is democracy really free? The idea that voters have a free choice in elections is misleading. While it may look like we have plenty of options, the system is structured in a way that leaves us with very few real choices. Third-party candidates often face a staggering uphill battle. Let's talk about ballots. Most states have strict rules for third parties to even get their candidates on the ballot. Some states require thousands of signatures just to be considered. In Texas, for instance, third-party candidates need to gather 80,000 signatures just to get on the ballot. Did you know? In the 2016 presidential election, Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, was only on the ballot in 44 states. Even though she had a substantial following, her campaign couldn't overcome the barriers to entry set by the system. This shows how third-party candidates can be locked out of the process even before they begin. Beyond the ballots, the media plays a huge role in shaping the illusion of choice. When third-party candidates are ignored or ridiculed, voters don't even consider them. Public opinion polling is another area where third parties are often excluded or downplayed. These polls typically focus on the top two parties, leaving third-party candidates in the dark, making it look like they don't have any real support. Think about this. In 1992, Ross Perot earned almost 19% of the national vote but didn't win a single state or any electoral college votes. His candidacy shows that public support doesn't always translate into real political power under the current system. Even when third-party candidates have substantial backing, the system makes sure that they cannot turn that support into actual political power. The spoiler effect is another example of how third parties are boxed out. Voters often avoid third-party candidates because they fear their vote will split the vote and lead to the wrong candidate winning. This leads to strategic voting, where people vote not for who they truly support, but for the candidate who is less bad than the others. It creates a false narrative that there are only two choices, even though more could be viable. While we like to think we live in a democracy, the reality is that third-party voices are consistently shut out of the political process. This illusion of choice leaves voters feeling like they have no power to change the system. The truth is, the game is rigged in favor of the two major parties, and third-party candidates are rarely given a fair shot. Chapter 6: Breaking the Mold. Can we ever escape the system? Despite the overwhelming obstacles, it's not all doom and gloom for third-party hopefuls. There are glimmers of hope, but change won't be easy. For starters, ranked choice voting, RCV, is gaining momentum as a potential solution. In RCV, voters rank candidates in order of preference, allowing them to vote for third-party candidates without the fear of wasting their vote. Maine adopted ranked choice voting in 2018, and it allowed independent candidates to gain a foothold in a way that was previously impossible under the traditional system. Interestingly, RCV could also help bridge the divide between major parties. It encourages candidates to appeal to a broader audience rather than just their base, which could reduce polarization. By introducing RCV into more states, third parties might finally get a fair shot at participating in elections without the fear of being spoilers. Another potential path forward is grassroots movements. Third-party candidates are already making waves by focusing on local elections, where they can have more influence. Candidates like Andrew Yang are showing that with enough grassroots support, a third-party campaign can gain attention. His shift from the Democratic Party to a potential independent run shows that, even within the two-party system, there's room for experimentation. Finally, the rise of digital campaigning is leveling the playing field. With social media and crowdfunding, third-party candidates can now bypass traditional media channels and fundraise without relying on corporate donors. This gives them a chance to compete on a more equal footing with the major parties. We also cannot ignore the power of discontent. As more voters become frustrated with the major parties, they're increasingly turning to third-party candidates for answers. In 2020, 12 million voters cast their ballots for third-party candidates. While this wasn't enough to swing the election, it shows a growing dissatisfaction with the two-party system. To break the mold, Americans need to come together, demand electoral reform, and challenge the status quo. If third-party candidates are to succeed, a shift in public consciousness is needed, one where voters start seeing third parties as real alternatives rather than wasted votes. Breaking free from the duopoly will be difficult, but it's not impossible. Change is often slow, but when the frustration with the two-party system reaches a tipping point, that's when real transformation can happen. If you enjoyed this breakdown of America's political system and want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe.